You know that feeling when you wake up, you head into the bathroom, you weigh yourself, and your whole mood depends on that number. Yeah, that was me. I dropped 30 kilos in 280 days, and here's exactly how I did it. I used to let one weigh in ruin my complete day. Now I weigh every single day and take an average trend from the week. Because essentially, your scale weight is always going to go like that. It can be food in the stomach that's not digested properly. It could be salty foods that's making you hold on to obviously water. It can be so many different things. And if we're only weighing once every week or once every 2 weeks or anything like that, if you catch yourself on a bad weighing day, that can just throw you off completely. Motivation can nosedive and you can think like, right, what's even the point of doing this? So with the scale weight, what you want to be aiming for is around 0.5 to 1 kilo loss per week. Obviously, that's always going to be subjective to your height, your weight, and obviously your activity levels. But as a rough average, that is where obviously you want to be sitting on a consistent basis. If that scale weight stalls over a 7-day period, what I did is recognize that and make sure that I am making a change, whether it obviously is increased output, whether it's through more steps or through more cardio, or obviously a drop in food. But the key thing there is you want to diet on as many calories as possible, because if you do that, it's going to allow you to stay on track for a longer period of time. Because if you can diet on higher calories and just increase your output, you've got more food for fueling your actual sessions, but you're also going to enjoy that process a lot more because you're not going to be going to bed hungry, as sometimes happens if you have to drop your food too low too quickly. Step 2, have a morning routine that sets you up for the day. So when I was overweight, first thing in the morning, I get up and have a massive bowl of cereal. One, the calories are super high, sugary cereal, not the best, but it's not super filling. So yes, these are a lot of calories, but they'd be digested very quickly, leaving me hungry by 9 or 10 a.m. When I recognized that, the change I made was focus on obviously protein first thing in the morning, but also high fiber. Both of these are going to keep you feeling fuller for longer, which is massively important when you're obviously in a fat loss phase. Some examples you could have is oats, maybe with some protein powder in it. You could have like eggs on sourdough if you've got obviously the time in the morning, or even some like fat-free Greek yogurt, even with some protein powder in there if you want to, with some frozen fruit and some honey, for example. Step 3, you need to make sure that you are not skipping meals. I used to do that because I was super busy and I wasn't hungry at the time. The thing with that is when you skip certain meals, the likelihood of you binging later on at night, let's say after you finish work, drastically increases, right? When you're obviously busy at work and your mind's active on the actual job that you're doing, you're not really thinking about food to a certain extent. You may get hungers, obviously spikes obviously throughout the day, that's normal, but your mind's not going to be occupied by food. When you get home 5, 6 p.m. and you're just chilling out, watching Netflix or whatever, naturally your mind is relaxing and it's naturally going to think about food. You're comfortable in that position wherever you are right now. Then the next thing is, oh, I want a bit of this, I might have a bit of that, I'm watching a film, or you want to get some snacks or anything like that. So it's like, that's fine, but it needs to be structured, it needs to be managed properly. But it's also the fact that, right, stack the chips in your favor, that's not going to be an issue later that night. So making sure that even if certain periods of time you are not hungry in the day, if that's when your meal is between 12 and 1 for lunch, let's say, make sure you're having that. Because if not, then that obviously might happen. And obviously then with the snacks, they're some of the biggest things that throw you off. Even like snacking on like nuts and stuff like that. Like I had a client last week and he was in a deficit for a period of time and he'd not lost any weight for 2 weeks. And I was like, right, let's take a closer look at the actual food diary side of things. Little did I know, he was snacking on pistachios, which he thought were healthy, so he wasn't tracking them. Turns out he's having around 400 calories of pistachios every single night. So it's very easy to do, especially if you're not knowledgeable around, right, that's good for me, that's not. And obviously the amount of calories that are actually in certain foods that are portrayed of obviously being actually healthy. Number 4, this is a big one that I see all the time, and it tripped me up a lot, right? Cardio versus weight. Which one do you prioritize and which one's the best for the goal that you're trying to achieve at that point? So we're speaking specifically fat loss right now, right? I usually think more running, more cardio, the better. It would help me obviously lose body fat and obviously minimal weight training, right? The only thing that happened was, yes, I got fitter, but it actually impacted my weight training, which weight training needs to be the biggest priority with this. So it actually had the opposite effect. I was doing all this work, but not seeing the benefits from it, leading to dips in motivation and nearly forcing me to quit. Actually, I did quit a few times, but we won't go into that in much detail until I found obviously the old winning formula that I'm running you through now. You got to think as well with cardio, it's going to naturally make you feel hungrier, and that's the thing where we're trying to avoid, because obviously the lack of food that you're actually going to have within this period of time is also going to knack your recovery, and naturally recovery is going to be a little bit lower and slower from sessions because you haven't got enough, as much food in your body to actually fuel your session and recover from them sessions. So it's like, right, do yourself a favor and control what you can control, right? We can't control having to actually drop food, which is then going to impact sessions. But what we can control is obviously the output that we're doing, and make sure it's managed properly and structured correctly, so it's moving us further towards the goal we're trying to achieve, not further away. So what I did was training pretty much 4 weight sessions per week. 3 is absolutely fine. If you really struggling for time, like an upper and lower, like 2 sessions per week is absolutely fine. And I utilize cardio and steps to move the needle forward when my fat loss started to stall, right? Because it's always going to happen at plateau, right? That's what you need to remember. You're doing, whether it's this amount of training, it's this amount of cardio, it's this amount of steps, this amount of calories, your body is very stubborn to change. So it's always going to adapt to that certain, whatever you want to call it, certain scenario, right? So when that does, it's like, right, what happens next? What do I do next, right? So again, when I was in that position, when I had that, obviously I built up that knowledge, I was like, right, things have started to slow down. I'm doing already four weight sessions. I can't really handle another weight session at that point. So, right, it's time to increase my steps. It's time to increase my cardio. But make sure this is so important, that you do not drastically jump up from, let's say you're doing 30 minutes of cardio per week at that point. It would be stupid to then up that by another 90 minutes to an hour and a half worth of training, right? You want to get the most amount of progress at the smallest amount of work, because always, I use the analogy now of, you have a set amount of tools in a toolbox, right? All these tools in this toolbox are going to help you obviously drop that body fat, right? We don't want to use all the tools in the toolbox straight away, because when plateaus happen, because they always will, if that happens and we've used all the tools, we've got no tools left to utilize to then push you past that plateau, right? And that's where then things get sticky and people rebound, right? So again, you just want to increase, again, we'll use the example of 30 minutes per week, right? You just want to increase that, just double that, just increase that by another 30. Right. And then obviously when things slow down again, increase it by another 30. And then again, I repeat, this is all subject to people's like actual lifestyles as well. Like, for example, if time is going to be an issue for you, if you physically can't get in 60, 90, 120 minutes of cardio per week, then you have no choice but to drop food, right? I had that within my time. I was at uni at the time. When I went through a period of when I was handing in my dissertation and stuff like that, I was like, right, I haven't got time to do all this cardio. So for that 2 or 3 weeks, I'd have super low food, because the calories that you are burning in the cardio, if you're not doing it anymore, then again, like, you are just going to put the weight back on, or at bare minimum, it's going to stall, right? So them calories need to come from somewhere. So I had to pull back on food, which yes, was majorly tough. But again, if you're in that position where I was at that specific point, even though mine was only for a limited amount of time, you have no choice but to pull from food. Like I said, it has to come from somewhere. So just always remember that. So just to round off, really, when plateaus come, we increase the amount of output you're doing, whether it's an additional session, if you can obviously take that into the time, or we gradually build up the steps. If you're doing 9,000 steps at that specific point, increase them to 11 or 12, right? It doesn't seem like a big jump, but over the course of a week, even if you increase your steps by 2,000, you've added an additional 14,000 steps for that week. That is a lot of additional steps for the week, right? So always remember that everything compounds. These small little changes will compound through the week and through the month. Okay. You're also making sure that weight training is always your priority, right? We want to allow your body to try and build as much muscle in the shortest amount of time. The more muscle your body has on your frame, the more lean muscle you have on your frame. I'm not saying you're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger and be absolutely huge. It's the fact that the more lean muscle tissue you have, the more body fat you will burn simply at rest, right? That's massively important to remember. And when you diet down, this is not for everybody, but the majority of people want to look like lean, athletic. They want to look toned. If you're not doing the training that needs to be done to build that, when you strip all the body fat off, you're just going to look skinny and scrawny, right? If that's the look you want, great, but 9 times out of 10 people don't want that. They want to reveal what essentially they've built within this process. Step number 5 is you need to track your calories. right? You need to track them, because if not, you're just going to spill over. And again, people can say that they eyeball it and stuff like that. It's very, very difficult to do that unless you've been tracking your calories for 10 plus years, okay? With your calories, obviously, as a start point, you can use obviously the calorie calculator, online. Harrison Benedict is probably the one that I would say is the most reliable. So obviously do that to work out obviously your actual starting point in calories. So when you get them set calories from whatever calorie calculator you use, you need to do a bit of testing within that first initial week, right? So you need to see, for example, right, I'm trying these calories over the next 7 days. Did I gain weight? Right? If I gain weight, obviously you need to drop 250 calories off that specific number. Okay. If you drop weight quite quickly, let's say 3, 4, maybe 5 pounds in a week, I would bump them calories up at 100 to 200, right? Because again, coming back to my point about all the tools in the toolbox, you don't want to drop too quickly because your plateau will come even quicker. Right, so again, just bump them up. So again, you diet on as many calories as possible, and then take it from there. We can go into detail about obviously the carbs and fats and stuff like that, but the calories will make up what they make up with your fats and the carbs. It's not. I don't want you to stress too much over that. I didn't. I just focused on protein and calories. What I'd want from protein is you want to try and get a gram per pound of body weight. So whatever you are in pounds, whatever weight you are in pounds. Let's say I'm 200 pounds. I would have obviously aim for 200 grams of protein, really. That may sound like a lot, but again, it's massively, massively important because your body takes a lot longer to digest protein more than carbs and fat. So you'll burn more calories through digestion, but it's also going to keep you feeling fuller for a lot longer, right? This was massively, massively important for me. Helped me so, so much, especially when in like seminars where it was like boring lectures and stuff like that. And again, when them feelings of hunger come, it's like, right, if I've done my job in terms of getting adequate amount of protein in, I'm going to feel fuller for longer, and it's less likely I'm obviously going to have them cravings. Number 6, I think it is 6, might be 5. If it's 5, I apologise, but I'm saying 6, is like when it came to eating out, right? I used to order Domino's, I used to order Uber Eats all the time. It just went on and on and on. I spent so much money, but I also got very, very out of shape like from doing that. Right, so it's very, very important that you keep them things in, right? I did, but it was a lot of trial and error, right? It was a lot of trial and error in terms of, right, how much can I actually eat? How much do I have to cut back within that week, right? So the main thing is, yes, we're obviously trying to drop body fat. Yes, you will have to make sacrifices, but I would try and aim to keep some of that stuff in, socializing, right? Because it's going to make it easier for you to stick to long term, especially if you have obviously a lot of fat to drop off. So if you know, for example, that you've got an event coming up at the weekend, for example, like you're going out for food or drinks or anything like that, obviously if you haven't got a coach, what you need to do is like look at that event, right? How many calories am I on right now? How many roughly calories I'm going to probably like consume, whether obviously ideally if you know obviously the meal you're going to have before you go out, obviously, or you obviously look online obviously how much alcohol obviously consumption in terms of, right, how many calories are per pint or per spirit or whatever, right? At that point, when you have that information, you'd be like, right, I need to then cut back throughout the week to create a bank of calories for that particular event. So what I did, I added a little bit more time. So I wanted to keep my food the same, but I wanted to create more of a calorie bank through doing more cardio. So let's say, for example, I was meant to be doing 60 minutes of cardio per week. I would sometimes like triple that or quadruple that to create a bank of calories for that particular event that I had. Maybe it was a night out or a meal out with the missus or anything like that, right? That's how I ran it. But again, like I said before, if, for example, you are too busy, you haven't got the time to increase more output, you have to pull from somewhere. So again, banking 150 or 200 calories per day of food, cutting that off. By the time obviously you get to the end of the week, you've got around 1,000 calories additional to play with because you've pulled off throughout the week, right? That is obviously a big one. Calorie banking will save your life if done correctly. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell. So I guess to round everything off, just to make sure you understand everything fully, training wise, I would be doing 3 to 4 weight sessions per week. That's what I did. I did legs, push, pull, and then an upper session. You can do upper, lower if you want to. Find out what works best for you. Find out what obviously you enjoy most, right? Because that is the most important thing. If you don't enjoy it, you're going to make it harder for yourself to actually stick to it, okay? So doing more of what you enjoy and less of what you don't. In terms of like general movement, I would be going around 8 to 12K steps per day. Again, sometimes if you're struggling for time, you're going to have to pull from food a little bit more. But if you have a little bit more time, I would obviously try and have that output as high as possible so you can diet on as many calories as possible. In terms of cardio, again, like I said, I would start off small, maybe 30, 45 minutes per week. When things start to slow down in terms of fat loss, you can then start to increase that just slightly. Again, so I would probably increase by 15 or 30 minutes per session. If, for example, you increase by 15 minutes and it doesn't move for like the next 3 to 4 days, then you know to obviously increase it a little bit more. Again, a lot of it in the beginning is just trial and error, and the deeper you get into the process, the more you'll see what works and how your body responds to certain things, as I did. In terms of food, like I said, you use your calorie calculator, and in terms of protein side of things, they're your main priorities, right? So your protein and your calories, the carbs and fats, they'll make up what they make up, right? Don't stress too much over that. There's very, very minimal difference that will make. But again, protein, if I'm 200 pounds in weight, I'm shooting for 200 grams of protein, right? Same obviously the calorie calculator. Again, Harrison Benedict is probably the best one that you're gonna get. But again, trial and error in that within the first sort of like 7 to 10 days, and then make your decisions based off that, right? Another thing, if you've not got a coach, one, I would highly suggest getting one. Speeds up the process completely. If not, make sure that you are doing your own check-ins. So again, I would do a review of your whole entire week, what went well, what didn't go so well. I would also be taking pictures, front, back, and side, right? I would also be doing measurements. So measuring my waist, measuring my arms, measuring my chest, measuring my thighs, right? Because the more ways you track, the more ways you can win, right? That's massively important to remember. If we're only looking at scale weight all the time as obviously a metric of progress, then it's very, very easy to think, right, oh, the scale weight didn't move for the next sort of like 5 days. Right, well, I'm not making any progress. Well, in fact, I've had clients now that sometimes their weight doesn't move for 10 days, but they've lost like 4 or 5 centimeters off the waist. So it's like, if we're not tracking that, I would never know that. So it's like, right, you need to make sure that you're looking at all these other different areas of progress as well as the gym side of things as well. Obviously, we touched on the weekends about banking calories. That's always going to be an absolute lifesaver, especially obviously if you're a young lad, social lad, everything like that. And finally, one thing that I missed, which is probably the most important part, so that's pretty shit of me that I missed the completely most important part of this video, is the fact that like sleep. I cannot stress the importance of sleep. Sleep hindered my progress so much because I was out drinking like every other night. I was obviously doing all these different things. I was going out late nights, struggling to sleep, and again, alcohol being a big part of that. So it's like, right, sleep can be people's biggest downfall, right? Whether it's through drinking, whether it's through working late nights, whatever it is, right? Your sleep is your superpower, right? I cannot stress that enough. It fuels obviously your day with the energy, and it also gives you, for example, actual clarity in terms of thinking for one. So it minimizes your stress throughout the day, but it's also the fact that, right, again, if you're struggling to sleep, if you're not getting the hours, you're not getting the recovery, you're going to be recovering, you're not going to be recovering optimally from your sessions, but also it's also going to lead to weight gain. So it's like, no matter how, even if you're doing the right things in the gym, with the cardio, with the diet, if your sleep isn't optimal where it needs to be, naturally you are going to be leaving progress on the table. Okay, so that is pretty much it in a nutshell. So I'm gonna obviously do a couple more videos on this to obviously go into certain parts of my journey in a lot more detail, so you can obviously learn from my mistakes really, and obviously fast track your progress. But yeah, that's it for this one. So it's pretty long, so I'm gonna have to chop this down. Hopefully I don't bore you too much. Hopefully obviously you can take a lot from it, and obviously apply it into your own journey. So thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I shall speak to you soon. Peace.